So our second speaker is Scott Chalmers. So he will talk on the frontier of regenerative ag. So Scott grew on a small mixed farm operation near Carroll, Manitoba. Scott completed his BSc Honours degree at Brandon University in Botany and Chemistry in 2004. Scott worked at AAFC in Brandon as a summer student with the plant pathology team headed by Dr. Debbie McLaren. And Scott also managed the non-profit Southeast Research Farm located near Redwood, Saskatchewan for 3 years. Scott then moved into diversification specialist position in 2014 and continues to manage the Vedo research program. Scott resides in Reston with his wife, Tennis, and 2 kids. Scott takes an interest in home brewing and intensive no-till gardening. So please welcome Scott.
Okay, thank you for coming out today. What I'm hoping to do for you today, kind of a promise, is to give you some familiarity on what regenerative agriculture is and what we're doing at the diversification centers that kind of relates to that. And I promise you I'm going to take you to France at the end of the day here, or at the end of the presentation. Not literally, but I'll show you a few pictures there that are quite compelling. So with that, this is the picture here is our 2019 trial, or 2018 trials actually, that we used a drone to take a picture of. It's always fascinating to look at everything in a straight line, and that's thanks to GPS. So just to give you a bit of background of where the diversification centers are, we're funded by the Manitoba Ag Action Program, which is a federal CAP program and ASI combined, and that helps support our activities of doing applied research. We belong in the applied research phase of the innovation continuum, so that goes from your basic idea all the way down to where it hits the field and into the marketplace. So everybody's involved with that, and there's always feedback coming back to us about what's happening in the field and what can we do to change that. We're staffed by having a Manitoba agriculture specialist. We have technical staff and our diversification center staff who are basically doing all the work in the field, and I have to thank them because that's why I'm here today. We're also nonprofits, which makes it unusual or unique that as a provincial employee, I help manage the nonprofit entity called Vedo. So it's unique because it's nonprofit and a public partnership. And with that, we try and do some agriculture extension at the same time, and this is where I am today. There's 4 diversification centers in Manitoba. We have one in Arberg, which is Pizé. Carberry has CMCDC. We have PCDF up in Roblin, and down in Melita, where I'm from, we have Vedo. And so, as you can see, they're in different growing environments, and that makes it powerful because we can do multi-site work all at the same time in different conditions and soil types. This is just a few pics of the team, the immediate teams. We have our staff, our board of directors who are farmers or connected to the industry somehow. They help advise of some of the activities. And down in the bottom right corner is my staff. And I'd like to thank them for working so hard and diligently on such complicated projects, and I'd like to show you some of the projects we have later on. This is what about 2,300 plots looks like. We have 3 different locations in 2019 just for Vedo, and if you can imagine doing this over 4 other locations across the province, that's the scale of effort that goes into this. And as you can see, there's a multitude of different crops we work with. I think every given year there's about 20 crops that we're looking at, and we also look at not only just variety trials, but some of the intercrops, rotation trials, that sort of thing. So combined, over 4 centers, we have over 8,000 plots of crops going on. We're quite unique. We work with diverse crops. The bottom left corner is hops. That's located in Boissevain, working with a hops producer there quite extensively. We have a sophisticated planter, air seeder that has seed hawk openers. In Piece A, at the bottom right corner, they have irrigation combined with tile, so they can do some really unique research there too. We do extension field tours, and you're more than welcome to come out. About mid-July is when we have our tours, and you can check out the plots for yourselves. So let's get to regenerative ag here. In the publication for Ag Days, it says it's a buzzword, and it sure is. It's come on strong in the last 2 years, I would say. I hadn't heard of regenerative agriculture before 2 years ago. This is a new thing to me, but we're doing things in regenerative ag that we've always been doing for the last 20 years. For example, no-till fits into the category of regenerative ag. If you go on Wikipedia, you get this definition. It's a set of principles to abide by, borrowing from permaculture, agroecology, and agroforestry. To me, that's pretty wide open. And this is the problem with it, is it's such a big topic, you can't define it. It's probably a 2-day seminar just to try and define it. It borrows practices from both conventional farming, organic, rotational grazing, and it just combines it all into one big vat. Basically, it's a holistic approach to farming. So you're taking all things into consideration, whether it's biological, ecosystems, water nutrient cycles, and trying to make money off it. It's kind of, we've gone through this no-till era, and we're kind of asking the question, now what? What are we going to think about now? We've kind of got good at no-till, but we've got to do better. So this is kind of where we're at with that. So regenerative agriculture has generally about 5 principles that it abides by. Number 1 being soil armor. Number 2, minimize soil disturbance, so that's no-till. Number 3, increase diversity and rotations. I think farmers have been doing that quite well here. Continual live roots. Now that's kind of a new topic. It's compelling because they want those roots to be feeding the soil instead of having a dead root there in the shoulder seasons, for example. This is a different approach, so it's going to be interesting in future research of how that changes the biota. For example, we know that no-till increases fusarium risk in wheat. It's when we used to till the soil, we used to work that under, and fusarium never had a great hold until we started no-tilling. So what if we have a live root? That's going to really change things. And then the 5th principle, for example, is integrating livestock. So there's a lot of grain farmers out there that are just grain farmers. This is new to them. And the opposite way, too, is there's a lot of livestock farmers that are not grain farmers. So that'll be new to them as well. However, these principles are very unique among who you talk to. Some sources have up to 11 different principles. You can't see this, I know that, but there's 5 different examples of who's talking about what. Gabe Brown has his ideas. Other companies have theirs. And basically, they're all talking about the same thing, more or less. Some have more than others. It's based on their goals, really. So it's hard to define. But I'm just sticking to the 5 just to make it simple. Soil armor can mean anything, whether you're growing something green or just having stubble left behind. The importance of having that is to reduce wind and water erosion, reduce weeds, use nutrients, that sort of thing. Minimize soil disturbance. We've been no-tilling for a long time. Actually, our plot research is no-till, so I'm hoping that's relevant to a lot of the audience today. Increasing your rotations. We all know how to do that. Continuous live root. Now, this is kind of a new idea. We've done quite a bit of research on this at Wado, planting, for example, soybeans into green rye that's terminated. I think it works great, and the tremendous amount of weeds that are missing in that system is very encouraging. We've also done work with planting clovers with spring wheat, and that's really neat too, because it really doesn't change the yield of the wheat, but then you get this continual live root, which I'll show you some more pictures later. Looking at corn and hairy vetch, for example, the corn is done its maturity in late August, and the vetch kicks it into high gear. That's the cool stuff. And then integrating livestock, the last pillar. The idea of doing this is to create, turn biomass into usable manure, so it's processed quickly, and it also encourages unique insects to come into the ecosystem, which we don't know what they do for the most part, but maybe they play an important role. And we know our ecosystems, at least in the past, included livestock, whether it was bison or deer or something like that, and they certainly have a place in ecosystems, perhaps as a species that's a keystone species, which can be important for ecosystems. So what's going on below ground? That's a black box, but we know there are good things. It's based on different root architectures. Of course, every species is different. There's time to decompose those roots, which is another phenomenon that you can take advantage of. They have different depths of roots. Some fix nitrogen. They give off these exudates, which are unique to each plant, and those plants have associations with bacteria or fungi that are unique as well. So this root life creates different chemistries that really is a black box for now, but we're one fact at a time we can get out of doing this research and build on that every year. So just for example, on the left side we have a canola root, and on the right side we have a pea root. And I've done quite a bit of research with pea canola intercropping, and we know that we use a lot more water by growing the two crops together than separately, and that may be due to that they're sourcing water from different depths. And you could take advantage of that and grow more yield per acre by utilizing just that simple characteristic. There's an interesting website, a reference, Wageningen University. It's from the Netherlands, and they have a whole library of different species of drawings that they've mapped the roots of each species. And here I put up the pea and canola system, and I drew a red line of where the peas ended at 60 centimeters deep. And as you can see, the canola goes way past that, and that's kind of the compelling ideas that make these systems over yield. Another topic I want to just quickly cover is, I think Yvonne mentioned it, how you can farm the shoulders of the season with cover crops, for example. The red arrows basically denote our normal rainfall and precipitation and growing season with the frost-free period. But outside that, there's still opportunity to grow plants at sub-zero temperatures. Not all plants die at 0 degrees or sub-zero, and they continue to grow. So we can utilize those characteristics and maybe grow our cover crops or relay crops. So for example, this is a measure of heat units over the last 7 years. I compared May 15th to September 1st, which is generally our growing season, versus April 1st to November 1st, which is when basically things freeze up. And we actually have 28% more heat units on the shoulders of the season that we're not utilizing, that the weeds are doing. You know, the weeds are using moisture and competing and getting a root going. Why not have something there that's useful and using that extra 28%? So why should you do regenerative ag, and why is this important? This is the whole plethora of benefits. There's economic benefits and agronomic benefits, which eventually translate into economic benefits. And I'm not going to go through them all because I can't quite see them all, but basically a lot of them are good things. You know, whether you're decreasing compaction, decreasing salinity, using more water, maybe you're helping out the bees, you know, you're maybe paying fewer vet bills because your animals are out of the corrals. These sorts of things add up. They're small things, and you know, if you're fixing your salinity problem on your farm, and maybe you have, you know, 8 to 10% of the farm under salt, that's a huge benefit for you if you're fixing that. And why would you want to do this? Most of them have to do with reducing risk. So, for example, having a cover on the field in the shoulders of the growing season is going to get you in the field better if things turn super wet. So you're going to go out and seed green while your neighbors are waiting for their dead stubble to dry out, and you're getting your crop in while others are not. So that's a huge risk savings. But there's many other things too, and a lot of them are ecological benefits that it's hard to put a price tag on, but over time it really adds up. Let's go back here. So what's happening on these farms that are doing this? Generally, we see local producers adopting regenerative ag, and they're seeing the results themselves. They see biological benefits, their soils are changing, and they realize those benefits, so they keep doing them. It's not because it makes them feel good or they're trying to change the climate problem. They just see benefits, and that's encouraging them to keep going with it. And we're also seeing young farmers do it because they know this takes time to work itself out, maybe several years. And some of the older producers just don't have that kind of time left in their career to care to do it. Farms are reducing their land base because they can grow more and do less. So maybe they're cutting back on labor, they don't have to do the pesticide passes as they used to, or work the land. And they're also increasing employees on that farm because it's more intensive. So they're dropping the land and hiring people. That's quite unique and encouraging. And it's often the smaller mixed farms, and the reason is they're integrating the livestock. They already have the infrastructure, the animals, they have the seeders, that sort of thing. You don't see strict grain farmers or strict livestock farmers doing this. It's the mixed farmers. But that's not to say you can't work with your neighbor who has livestock and bring them onto your grain farm. You'll likely see benefits if you can work together. Down the food chain here, right to marketplace, there's a few companies that are taking this at hand. We have General Mills, Homo Foods, and Danone, who've openly come out to public and say that they're encouraging regenerative agriculture within their marketing plan. There's other groups more locally here, the Manitoba Forage Grassland Association, and Ducks Unlimited just had a Regenerative Ag Days in Brandon in November, and they're actually having it again in 2020. So that's great. Then we have advisory or groups that are advising farmers of how to do this, and they maybe charge a fee or something like that. We also have our own department who's thinking about regenerative ag in their strategic initiatives, and that helps guide me in what we do at WATO as well, and at the diversification centers. So it's out there, it's coming out, but it's still quite the early phase, I would say. So what are the DCs doing? The diversification centers? Manitoba came out with their protein strategy, which is to try to encourage protein production in Manitoba to rise to 35% from what it is today in 2025. So with that, we have to grow more crop or livestock, and this kind of fits in with the regenerative ag principles. We do applied research and extension. We prefer to do short-term projects, 1 to 4 years, and do different systems or rotations. We can look at annual grains, intercrops, cover crops, etc. We've looked at perennial forage. We have done on-farm testing and worked with farmers on that. And we like things simple, replicated if possible. I've personally done 35 intercropping projects in the last 12 years, just to put it in perspective. So one of those projects being pea and canola, and lately I've been putting alfalfa in the mix. We know pea canola can yield more per acre. We've also seen a reduction in aphids, in the pea aphids by far. There's lots of encouraging benefits, such as lower disease in the peas, lack of lodging, just better seed quality, those sorts of things. And by putting the alfalfa in that mix, we're creating a relay that's a living root, and we can either keep it next year or seed into it and terminate it, for example. Gives us options, just in case conditions change. Here's a pea canola field just north of Boissevain a few years back, and it underwent a frost in late May, and it killed most of the canola off, but good to have the peas there because they continue to grow, and it's actually a fantastic crop of peas. So it kind of gives you a risk benefit in case you do hit bad conditions like this. You didn't have to go back and reseed your crop. A farmer here near St. Leon done pea canola. He's experienced anywhere from 19% more grain to 49% more grain going through that combine. And they say that when it goes through the combine, it works really hard because there's so much to process. So that's kind of cool. Here's a farmer near Nesbitt it's an organic farmer who mixed oats, mustard, and peas together and just flat seeded across the field. And as you can see, the crops kind of sorted themselves out with this topography. The peas were on the hills, the oats on the lees on the hills, and then the mustard in the low spots. So if you were just to seed oats, the oats probably didn't grow in the low spots, but mustard did. So we're getting better use of that land by having a diversity of species. And to separate these kinds of intercrops, farmers come up with clever contraptions. Here's a quick clean doing pea canola, and he's got a multitude of augers. And this sort of system can keep up to a 9600 combine, no problem. It works pretty good. Then things get a little more complicated the more you bring in. So this farmer down in Pearson, he had to use a combine as a hopper to store I'm guessing the trash coming off or something. You got to get creative, but things do pay off in the end. We've also looked at doing some hemp with relay legumes. And hairy vetch has been one of my favorites, though it is very aggressive. It doesn't really bring down the hemp yield, but encouragingly, it provides some green cover well after harvest. And alfalfa, too, is one of my favorites under hemp. It gives you that option to keep it, let it grow, or terminate it next spring. 5 minutes? Okay. That's just a picture of the aftergrowth after hemp, the vetch and the alfalfa. Here's one of my favorites, corn and hairy vetch. This is to encourage greater protein production per acre. And this producer could have taken off the grain corn, no problem, but chose to feed it off to his animals. And as you can see, the vetch is still green and the corn is done. So we're utilizing more resources over that year, growing a nutritious crop for livestock and the soil. Here's vetch under sunflowers, and this producer had about 2,400 pounds to the acre of sunflower, turned around and harvested the vetch, about 500 pounds an acre, and he actually probably made more money off the vetch, which is worth about $4 to $5 a pound. This is what the vetch looks like in some cases after. It dissolves itself in the canopy once light is taken away by the sunflower, and it continues to grow up the side of the plant. One risk I think might be here is the contamination or the contact transfer of sclerotinia from the vetch to the sunflower. So, but up top here, the vetch is growing flowers well after sunflowers had finished and keeping the bees happy. Here's rye and vetch growing together for seed production, or I guess this is winter wheat. We've done some work with winter wheat and soybean relays in plots. Very water dependent. This would, I think, only work on a wet year, but in the last 3 years, it has been not encouraging because it's so dry. Did you guys lose it too? Okay. Any questions in this meantime? Yeah.
Does the urban decrease with the tillage? You're talking about the huge area effect with
A little louder.
If you could till, would it prevent ergot, or is ergot a bigger problem than zero till, like the huge area?
I don't know. I suspect it's really no difference because ergot sends up a mushroom from its dormant seed, for example, and it can travel, I know, at least 1 or 2 inches out of the ground. So even if you worked it in, it's probably going to be more encouraged, if anything, to grow in a tillage system, I would think. But say the last part again. Yeah. So the question was, can you drop your seeding rate of rye to increase your chances of having a better soybean? For sure. And I think to be honest, it goes as low as something like 20 pounds to the acre rye to get a weed suppression effect for that system. So you don't have to grow 2 bushels to the acre of rye. You just pull it way back to just a few plants. Yeah. But certainly more is better, but not too much. So we'll skip ahead here. I haven't, but I think Lana has. No? Okay. I can't grow faba beans to save my life in Melita, so. It's, okay, I do have a video here, but I'm not going to play it. Carberry is working on a project by mulching in mustard before a potato stand, and that mustard gives off gases that can fumigate the soil and basically kill wireworms, verticillium wilt, rhizoctonia, among other different fungal species. That's compelling because potato production is so intensive, and by having at least something green to hold the dirt down, and if it can act as your pesticide, that's even better. So Cropsapalooza is coming on in 2020. I believe they're going to have a demonstration of this. This is work coming out of PEI. We've worked with soybean and flax. I wouldn't encourage doing this. Again, as you can see, it's moisture sensitive. It maybe would work on a wet year, but not on a dry year. We've tried to put agrotane-treated urea in the flax rows to try and mask the urea effect on nodules, but it doesn't work so far. Plans for 2020, we got a few things going on. I'm hoping to do Yvonne's corn interseeding job. We'll see if that gets funded. We're going to continue a bit of work on winter wheat and soybean. Look at some intermediate wheatgrass or Kernza at PCDF. That's a perennial wheat. Maybe do some mixes with faba bean, flax. For example, we're going to plant some squash into rye stands, that sort of thing. We've been working on an intercropping project looking at mustard to potentially inhibit Aphanomyces in pea. This is research coming out of Lethbridge with Shama Chatterton. Doing some other intercrops with pea, just trying to find ways to grow peas a little bit better in Manitoba. PCDF have some livestock, which is sheep on some of their plots, and they're just looking at the livestock effect versus just doing green manure. We work with our producers down in the Southwest on their stuff. Growing cover crops, I'm beginning to love a bit more and more. It's growing on me, and it's amazing what that can do for the soil, especially in large rainfall events. The day before, it rained about 3.5 inches, and we were able to drive on the field the next day. We've gone through some wet spells in Melita, or in the Southwest here, especially in 2011, and what those guys do to have that green root growing all the time is amazing, and it really changes things. In this photo, the bottom half there had alfalfa the year before, and they seeded their winter wheat into it. So if you can imagine this as a risk tool, that's really encouraging. Here's Melita 2011. It's basically turned into a lake. One of our fellow producers won the Stuck in the Muck photo contest that year. I guess maybe cover crop. I don't know if cover crops would get to you to a point where you're not burying the tractor like that, but at least they're going to help. So I promised France here. This was a field in France that had been plowed for years. There's supposed to be a rye crop growing here. It's so waterlogged there. The tillage is not helping. But just within a mile away, this farmer who's using cover crops, integrating livestock, has got very encouraging results. And this is his rye. So a world of difference just a mile away. This is what the soil looks like different. You got your punky, drowned out clay soil versus your darker soil. It has worms in it. It's got a cover on it, doing very well. So to me, that's a huge difference, and made me realize the effect of a plow and how that changes the landscape. Now, every water drop counts. We can't, when things turn dry, you got to be very vigilant. You may have to terminate those covers in order to save the water supply in order to grow your crop. That line made a huge difference by terminating the volunteer rye. We had our plots. The farmer waited another 2 weeks and lost every drop of water on his side. So if you're thinking of regenerative ag, don't bet the farm on it. That's my encouragement of the day. But you can start with small changes and long term. Find a research network that you can join that's on farm. Potentially, I know the Pulse Growers have one. Yvonne's looking for survey results or plot research areas. Replicate for sure. Keep good records. Communicate with your peers and your neighbors and researchers, for example. And think holistically. And when I talk about that, think of the farm as a nutrient economy rather than just pure profit and loss. If you can, bring that in for sure. But if you think about the farm where you're importing nutrients and exporting nutrients, whether it's grain, for example, or animals, think of how you're going to replace those nutrients, because that will make your farm sustainable. And I'd like to acknowledge our funding. We have Ag Action, Ag Canada, commodity groups, the University of Manitoba. And I'd like to thank our board of directors for supporting us and our local farmers. Here's our website. We have all our results posted there over the years, and it's searchable. And here's some Twitter stuff, our QR code for the website, if you want to take a photo and work with it later. So maybe this is a good time for questions if there's time. Okay, the question was, we have a flat wheat field that's under snow. What are we going to do with it next year? I'm going to have my doubts that you can feed it to people. And if you can feed it, it's going to be to livestock. If you can fence it, that would be fantastic, and graze it. If you don't have animals, now you have to deal with the residue. If you can plant something into it, like corn, for example, go for it. But if it's too thick even for that, you're going to have to deal with the residue, whether through tillage, which I don't encourage, or fire, or actually just swathing and baling it and dealing with it some other way. But please try not to till. I just think that's too aggressive, but you may have to. Okay, so we looked at when to plant the clover in spring wheat. We looked at before seeding, during seeding, or after. To be honest, it doesn't much matter what method you choose. It seems to grow. I would potentially cut back a little bit on my seeding rate of wheat to encourage more clover growth, but I wouldn't go under, say, 100 pounds to the acre of wheat seed. We're seeding clover about 8 pounds to the acre. Winter wheat's terrible. It's just too competitive, and you'll never see the clover ever. We use sweet clover, yellow sweet clover. Yeah.
Does it hinder your harvest?
No, not that I've seen. It does get into the header, but it doesn't produce viable seed at that time. It has to produce seed the next year. It's a biennial.
Are you going on the booth? Just mention maybe.
Oh, yeah. If you want to talk to me later, I'm down at my Diversification Center booth at the Curling Club. I'll be there for the rest of the day, booth 676.
Okay, Scott, thank you so much.